Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Dr. Barry Sears pioneered the concept that food affects hormones like insulin. Can the Mediterranean diet improve blood sugar control? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
The Zone diet was one of the first to reduce carbohydrates while promoting healthy fats and moderate protein consumption. Dr. Sears has also turned his attention to inflammation as an underlying contributor to many of our most damaging chronic diseases.
The Mediterranean diet has substantial scientific support, but what is a true Mediterranean diet? Various regions around the Mediterranean have different favored foods. Which ones are most helpful?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Barry Sears provides new insights on the Mediterranean zone.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, the evidence that sunscreens prevent cancer may not be as strong as people would like to believe. That's the conclusion from a Cochrane review. The Cochrane collaboration is an impartial volunteer group of scientists who analyze research evidence on medical interventions according to strict criteria. The authors looked for randomized controlled trials of sunscreen to prevent basal or squamous cell carcinoma. After searching the literature up to May 2016, they found one eligible study. It was conducted in Australia with 1,621 volunteers over the course of 4.5 years. In this study, there was no significant difference in the rate of skin cancer between those assigned to use sunscreen every day and those who used it only intermittently. The researchers concluded, we were unable to demonstrate from the available evidence whether sunscreen was effective for the prevention of basal cell carcinoma or cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma. They did not study the connection between sunscreen and melanoma, the most dangerous type of skin cancer. Critics were quick to point out that absence of evidence doesn't mean sunscreen doesn't help, but it would be good to have better scientific support for a product people use every day.
Exercise remains one of the most powerful interventions for promoting health and preventing disease. An article in the BMJ reviewed 174 studies published over 25 years. The scientists evaluated the amount of physical activity people were engaging in and their chances of developing chronic conditions. Those who were most active were least likely to develop diabetes, colon cancer, breast cancer, heart attacks, or strokes. The investigators say that current exercise recommendations are too low to provide the best protection. They conclude that greater attention and investments in interventions to promote physical activity in the general public is required.
Weight loss experts have long suggested that people should never shop for food when they're hungry. Doing so increases the likelihood they'll purchase more high-calorie foods on impulse. Now, a study from Carnegie Mellon University suggests the same principle may hold for meals. The researchers found that people who order their food a few hours ahead of mealtime make better dietary choices. It's easier to control impulses, it appears, if there's a significant delay between choosing and eating the food. One experiment offered almost 400 employees of a healthcare company the chance to place their lunch orders at least 30 minutes ahead of pickup, but they could place those orders as early as 5 hours before. People who planned further ahead ordered and ate fewer calories. This time delay also held up for college students given a chance to order lunch before or after a class that ended at noon.
Could acupuncture delay the development of dementia? Chinese researchers did a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials comparing acupuncture and medical treatment for mild cognitive impairment with forgetfulness. Their answer is a qualified yes. In the 5 trials they found, with more than 500 research subjects, The statistical review showed that those who had received acupuncture had better scores on cognitive tests compared to those given the drug nimodipine. They note, though, that the included studies had methodological flaws, and they call for more rigorously designed research.
One promising approach to Alzheimer's disease prevention shows that aerobic physical activity protects the brain. Nearly 900 people have been participating in the cardiovascular health study for 30 years. These volunteers, average age 78, have undergone cognitive testing periodically. They also answer questionnaires about their physical activity and have had MRI scans of their brains. Those who participated in the most physical activity had larger brain volumes in their frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes, including the memory center called the hippocampus. These individuals were 50% less likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease during the study. Walking, dancing, swimming, or gardening can all be beneficial. People with mild cognitive impairment also benefited if they increased their physical activity. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Over 1/3 of adult Americans are obese. Diabetes is at epidemic levels. Could our dietary choices be contributing to these catastrophic conditions?
Part of the problem might be that our eating patterns promote inflammation throughout the body. Inflammatory reactions contribute to heart disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. Could changing the way we eat reverse the inflammatory process?
To find out more about diet and inflammation, we turn to Dr. Barry Sears. He's a research scientist who has become an authority on dietary control of hormone response. He's president of the nonprofit Inflammation Research Foundation. His 13 books include The Zone, The Anti-Inflammatory Zone, and his most recent, The Mediterranean Zone.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Sears.
Well, thank you very much.
Nice to have you back on the People's Pharmacy. How long has it been? We talked to you early on when The Zone was first published.
That's probably close to 20 years now.
That sounds right. You know, there are probably listeners who don't even remember what The Zone was all about. I mean, you were kind of the first kid on the block to really be talking about how nutrition could affect how we feel. There was Dr. Atkins, but you were kind of right on his heels, and you were not as big a target for the diet dictocrats as he was. So why don't you just give us a quick executive summary of The Zone and why it was so revolutionary at the time?
The Zone is based on the concept that food may be the most powerful drug you'll ever interact with. And that's because food can affect hormones, and hormones are hundreds of times more powerful than any drug. But the door can swing both ways. Food can be your greatest hormonal ally. It can also be your worst hormonal enemy. What I tried to lay out in The Zone was the science of how food works as a drug and how we can use that science to retake control of our genes, really the expression of our genes, which was a very extraordinary concept at the time, but now it's becoming more commonplace in academic medicine.
Why is it that The Zone kind of faded from view? There are so many diet plans out over the last 20 years. I think people's eyes begin to glaze over when you talk about, the South Beach diet and this diet and that diet, and you sort of go, oh, I'm overwhelmed. And, what was true for The Zone is still true today.
I think that's true. I can't think of any best-selling diet book in the 21st century that's not a variation of The Zone. So they often say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so I'm very flattered.
Now, Dr. Sears, the new book is The Mediterranean Zone. And, of course, we have been hearing a lot about the benefits of the Mediterranean diet. There have been a number of research articles published based on the PREDIMED study that was conducted in Spain several years ago. And It all sounds terrific. Mediterranean diet sounds like it's going to be good for us if we have or are headed towards diabetes. It can help us avoid that fate. It can help our hearts. It can help our brains. I don't know what part of us the Mediterranean diet isn't going to help. So can you explain to us, please, the answer to a question we get a lot? What is a Mediterranean diet?
Well, frankly, nobody knows. And that's why one of the things I try to do in the zone, or the Mediterranean zone, is to explain. There are 16 countries that surround the Mediterranean Sea, and each one has a very different dietary aspect. When we hear the word Mediterranean diet, we think of going to the Olive Garden and having a glass of red wine. Nothing could be further from the truth. The key why the Mediterranean diet, totally undefined, has all these health benefits is because of one thing. All these cuisines contain lots of colorful fruits and vegetables. They're colorful because they contain polyphenols, and that's the essence of why you get the health benefits of the Mediterranean zone. That is, the polyphenols, if taken in high enough concentrations, are also anti-inflammatory ingredients. So in many ways, what I've done with the Mediterranean zone is really the last of my trilogy. I feel like kind of writing Star Wars here. I started off with the zone, talking about how the balance of protein to carbohydrate and fat control hormonal responses, followed by the omega-RX zone that talked about the benefits of high-dose fish oil to decrease the levels of inflammation, and the Mediterranean zone is really that end of that trilogy of how these polyphenols affect our body in terms of basically not only reducing inflammation, but at high enough concentrations can slow down the aging process.
Dr. Barry Sears, I know that your doctorate is in biochemistry. What the heck is a polyphenol, please?
Exactly. Well, it turns out it's a very, very complex molecule that plants make to defend themselves against bacteria. And we're in a constant struggle against bacteria. That's why we have defense systems. So the more of these polyphenols we have in our body, the more alike we are to basically be able to defend ourselves against bacterial infection. And more importantly, we now know through new breakthroughs in molecular biology that these polyphenols at high enough concentrations can significantly change the expression of our genes, and especially the ones which control the aging process.
Well, let's get very specific. Because, when people talk about the Mediterranean diet, they somehow focus in on, salmon, that's it. I'll have salmon for dinner.
I don't think there's any salmon swimming around in the Mediterranean.
But for some reason, that's what people have focused on.
Okay.
And then they go, and I'll have like that glass of red wine that you mentioned. Oh, and if it's Italy, I guess I'll have a little pasta. And very rarely do they specifically mention the vegetables, and yet that's a key component. So when you talk about high polyphenol vegetables and colorful vegetables, what are you talking about?
Well, we're talking about the things, if you ever go to Italy, you see lots of grilled vegetables, massive amounts. And those are the basics of all the Mediterranean diets all throughout the Mediterranean region, is lots of vegetables. Now, these are things Americans hate. So again, that's why the transfer of the concept of the Mediterranean diet to America will be a difficult one. Let me give you an example. We talk about the benefits of red wine. No one ever talks about the benefits of vodka because there are none. It's not the alcohol. It's the alcohol in the red wine that's extracting the polyphenols from the grape that gives all the health benefits. Now, a good rule of thumb that you need about 1 gram of polyphenols per day. Doesn't seem like a lot. But to get that, you have to drink 12 glasses of red wine. Now, many people try, but again, that's very difficult to do on a lifetime basis.
This does not sound like a prescription for good health.
It does not. And that's why, again, we go back to another source of our polyphenols, fruits and vegetables. Unfortunately, you have to take in lots of fruits and vegetables, like maybe 2 pounds of vegetables per day. It's not that hard, but it can be done.
Just 1 second, 2 pounds.
But that doesn't sound so unfortunate. I mean, this is beginning to sound like the DASH diet, which also has a lot of research to back it up.
2 pounds? Terry, that's a lot.
It's easy.
No,
Joe, let me give you an example.
One of your artichokes is going to be more than half a pound.
You don't eat the whole artichoke.
Yes, you
just
do.
eat the leaves.
Well,
Let me give you an example of what 2 pounds might look like. It's not that hard. That might be 2 red peppers, 1 red onion, 1/2 pound of asparagus,
okay.
1/4 pound of broccoli, and 1/4 pound of cauliflower.
That doesn't sound so undoable.
Well,
Exactly.
I'm trying to get my head around all of this. So, like, you have to eat the whole red onion. Now, I happen to love red onions, but I don't know that I could eat a whole red onion every day.
I think most days you eat at least half an onion.
That's possible. But what about the asparagus? How many asparagus spears are there in, what did you say?
Half a pound.
Half a pound?
Half a pound. Yeah, probably about 8 to 10.
Oh, well,
You can do that.
I can absolutely do that. So what you're saying is that it is doable, but you have to think about it. You mentioned a little while ago that Americans hate these vegetables. Now, I think Americans do like things like asparagus and
cauliflower.
Broccoli. Well, maybe not so much
not the broccoli.
And there are there's a lot of debate about Brussels sprouts.
Well, personally, I think they're great from a nutritional standpoint. I can't stand them personally, so I don't eat them. So again, you find the fruits and vegetables you'd like to eat with the emphasis on the vegetables. That's why your grandmother told you many generations ago, you can't leave the table until you eat all your vegetables. She was basically giving you breakthrough knowledge of the biotechnology of how basically these polyphenols found in the vegetables control your future health destiny.
Well, our grandmothers were very wise.
Well, they were wise because they were the repository of millennia of observations of what works and what doesn't.
So what are your favorite vegetables?
Well, I just named them. Those are the ones I have all the time. Why? Because they're tasty, and 2, anyone who's ever gone to Italy has never gone back saying, boy, they had the worst grilled vegetables in Italy.
One other source of polyphenols in Italy actually is the olive oil. It turns out that olive oil is full of polyphenols.
And that's why the good olive oil never leaves Italy. The stuff we see here in the United States is basically the kind of the rot gut that they would never touch in Italy. Now, here's the problem, though. Olive oil does contain polyphenols. But to get that 1 gram of polyphenols per day, you might have to take down about 1 gallon of olive oil.
I'm not going to do that, so I'll stick with the vegetables and some olive oil and maybe some days a glass of wine.
Exactly. And now we go back to your statement about the salmon. There's no salmon in the Mediterranean Sea. But salmon is rich in omega-3 fatty acids. You need adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids to turn off the fires of inflammation. And if you don't get adequate levels, then you'll have low-level inflammation on a consistent basis below the perception of pain, but that's what causes us to gain weight, become sick, and age at a faster rate.
You're listening to Dr. Barry Sears. He's the scientist who popularized the concept of the zone as an anti-inflammatory diet. His latest book is The Mediterranean Zone.
We need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll find out about the pluses and minuses of cod liver oil.
Where does cellular inflammation come from? And how can we measure it? We'll find out how it influences overall health.
We'll learn about C-reactive protein and why Dr. Sears is interested in the ratio of various fats in our bloodstream.
What could we learn about improving our health from studying traditional Japanese diets?
We'll learn which vegetables are great and which ones are not so good. Do polyphenols make the difference? And we'll talk about my favorite topic, breakfast.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Squatty Potty toilet step stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
And by Redx Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you would like to order a CD of this show, you can do so by calling 800-732-2334. This is show number 989. That number again, 800-732-2334. Or you can place the order online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're talking about how Americans could be healthier if they followed a Mediterranean-style diet. But what exactly is a Mediterranean diet? Our guest, Dr. Barry Sears, points out that a traditional healthy diet follows the principles of the zone. And in the Mediterranean region, people get the benefit of plant chemicals called polyphenols. His latest book is The Mediterranean Zone.
Dr. Barry Sears, we have just been discussing the wisdom of the grandmothers who told you to eat your vegetables. And we've been talking about omega-3 fatty acids. One of the other things that wise grandmothers did generations ago, not so much lately, is administer cod liver oil to the kids and grandkids. Can you tell us why this might have been a good idea, even though they didn't know the reasons why?
It turns out it's a very good idea because cod liver oil was a concentrated source of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, it's probably the worst tasting source of omega-3 fatty acids known to mankind and still is, but it provided that 1 tablespoon of cod liver oil every child had to take before they could leave the house, gave them 2.5 grams of omega-3 fatty acids. Let's put that in perspective today. The average American takes in 125 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids. And you wonder why our healthcare system's out of control? Because we're constantly inflamed. And without adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids, you cannot turn down the fires of inflammation caused by the other aspects for our diet, which have dramatically enhanced in the last several years, which are the increase of refined carbohydrates and the increase of omega-6 fatty acids. When you combine these together, you basically are doing everything in your power to cause inflammation in every one of your 10 trillion cells.
So when you say inflammation, what exactly do you mean? I mean, everybody who's listening knows that if they get out a hammer and they're hammering a nail and they miss and hit their thumb, it's going to hurt, it's going to be red, and it's going to swell up. That's inflammation. You're talking about invisible inflammation. Tell us what it is and why it's so bad.
Well, I'll call it really cellular inflammation. It's there, but it's below the perception of pain. And if you can't feel it, you do nothing to stop it. But this type of inflammation will linger for years, if not decades, causing consistent and constant organ damage until there's enough organ damage we call it chronic disease. It could be diabetes. It could be heart disease. It could be cancer. It could be Alzheimer's. These are all inflammatory conditions. And the goal of nutrition is to keep inflammation in a zone, not too low that you can't fight off microbial infections or have your injuries heal, but not too high that this inflammation starts attacking your own body.
So I want to know where this inflammation comes from. I mean, you've sort of alluded to omega-6s, you've alluded to refined carbohydrates, but specifically with regard to foods. I mean, pizza. We just heard a couple of weeks back that pizza might not be so good for kids. But, how do you tell a teenager, sorry, no more pizza? I mean, that's just not going to fly.
Well, that becomes our great conundrum we have in the 21st century. We understand now how the foods we eat can either turn on or turn off inflammation. Now getting people to comply is a great question. But first of all, you have to have a base, really a focus. And this is why we have right now in nutrition this almost, everyone seems to be an expert. And the internet has basically expanded this. And so we have people running around saying, I don't know what to eat, and therefore it doesn't matter. It matters more now than ever. And that's what I talk about in the keeping that zone of inflammation. That's where the word zone came from. It's not some mystical place. It's how your food can keep that inflammation in that zone. And if you can do that, your life becomes a lot easier. Now, getting people to do it is really, you have to give them like a political campaign. You have to tell them why it's worth the effort. Why it's worth the effort? Because if you're trying to lose weight, it's not because you're a weak-willed ninny. It's because your fat cells are inflamed. If you're trying to basically prevent a heart attack, it's not because you're not taking enough statins. It's because your heart cells are inflamed. If you're worried about basically losing your mind, it's not because you're basically getting older. It's because your brain is inflamed. So we have, and this is my basic premise 40 years ago, whoever understands how to control inflammation controls the future of medicine. And my approach was taking that of Hippocrates. It all comes from the food we eat. And we treat food like a drug. It doesn't have to taste like a drug. But if we treat food like a drug, trying to maintain the balance of protein, carbohydrate, and fat the best we can every meal, we have a drug of immense proportions that can turn our society around. Unfortunately, we have basically what I call processed foods 1.0, where we basically have learned how to take food ingredients and make them incredibly tasty and cheap. And what's this done? It's turned on inflammation in our cells of everyone in America. And that's why that basically, unless we address this problem, our future is incredibly bleak.
Dr. Barry Sears, do we have a way to measure inflammation? How would we know that our cells are inflamed? And how would we tell if following the Mediterranean zone was working?
Well, until recently, we really had no way of knowing it. How can you measure something that you can't feel? Well, there are certain blood tests. The first one appeared about 20 years ago. It's called high-sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's not a very good test. It's not reproducible, but it's something. A far better test that we've used, and actually was first reported in the literature by Harvard Medical School 25 years ago, is the ratio of two fatty acids in the blood. One fatty acid is called arachidonic acid. That's the building block of making all the inflammatory hormones that basically cause inflammation to go out of control. The other fatty acid is called eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA, which is the building block of making the hormones that turn down inflammation. The balance of those two fatty acids in your blood will tell your future. It tells you whether you're in that zone or not. And the average American, the ratio for the average American is about 18. The average ratio for somebody in the Mediterranean region who would follow the old ways is about maybe 10. And those in Japan, it's about 1.5. And maybe this explains why the Japanese have the longest health span of any population in the world, the lowest rates of heart disease, and also the lowest rates of depression.
So it sounds as though we should all be aiming for a ratio between arachidonic acid and EPA similar to that found in the Japanese population?
Exactly. And the only way to get that, there's no drug that can do that. Only the diet can. And how long does it take to get there? Probably about 30 days. Getting there is easy. Staying there for their lifetime, that's the hard part.
So our listeners are saying to themselves, wow, I've never heard of that. This arachidonic acid, I guess it's abbreviated AA, to the eicosapentaenoic acid, that's probably EPA, so AA to EPA. How would I get a blood test that would reveal that ratio?
You probably had to go to Harvard Medical School because it's routinely used there. It's not a standard blood test. It's easily done, though. Actually, we've developed a finger prick test. Just a drop of blood can tell what the levels are, just as you would basically find out what the levels of glucose are by a glucometer. And there are several laboratories that basically do that type of testing that's available to the general public. But if you took only one blood test in your life, this would be the blood test you want to take. It tells you what your future will be. Either it's very good or very bleak, but something that's under your complete control that you can change within 30 days.
Now, of course, most people, when they go to their primary care physician or a cardiologist, the blood test that they're going to get is total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and maybe even triglycerides. are they no longer as important?
They really aren't. They're important because they're saying something's going wrong. And something's going wrong in the liver. That's where all those molecules are basically made. And what goes wrong in the liver? It's called insulin resistance. What causes insulin resistance? Inflammation. So here's the best test you want to look at. Look at the ratio of your triglycerides to HDL. Your doctor will know about this, but you'll get out the numbers. If it was less than 1, you're basically keeping inflammation under control in the liver. Most Americans, it's pretty close to about 3.5, and by the time you're 4, you are a full-fledged diabetic. And what's the fastest growing disease in America? Diabetes.
Well, let's go back for a sec, because I think this is something that people can actually get access to. So when they go and they get a blood test, they will probably get their HDL number, and with a little luck, they'll get triglycerides as well. And how do they calculate this? And again, what should it be?
Well, the calculation is pretty simple. You take the triglycerides and divide it by the HDL cholesterol. And ideally, it should be less than 1.
Okay, so triglycerides divided by HDL cholesterol means that if you have very high triglycerides, it's going to be more.
That's right, and that's a bad sign.
Yes.
Yeah, let's get very specific, because there are a lot of people out there who have an HDL level somewhere around, let's say 45 or 50.
Which is not too bad for HDL.
And most physicians wouldn't get too excited about that. The higher the better is the way it's usually perceived. But a lot of people have triglycerides of 150 or more. So what you're saying is that if your triglycerides are around 150 and your HDL is around 50, your ratio is 3-to-1 rather than under 1. So you're
in trouble.
You're in trouble, and you better get your triglycerides down. How can you do that?
Well, here's the old easy way. You eat a lot of vegetables. It's very hard to overconsume vegetables. It's very easy to overconsume pizza.
So you eat vegetables instead of bread or pizza or pasta, right?
Exactly. And remember how I told you about the grandmother saying, don't leave the table, not before you eat all your bread, but you can't leave the table until you eat all your vegetables.
Now, there are some vegetables that are really starchy, like potatoes, and there are other vegetables that are much less so, like broccoli. So are there some vegetables that are better than others? You know, we've been told to stay away from white stuff, and yet cauliflower presumably is one of the good guys.
Well, there's always exceptions to every rule, but here's a good rule of thumb. The more white you put on your plate, the more inflammation you create. The more white pasta you put in your plate, the more white rice you put in your plate, the more white potatoes you put in your plate, and the more white bread you put in your plate, the more inflamed you're going to become. The more color you put in your plate, on the other hand, you'll basically be reducing the fires of inflammation if it's balanced. And that's why we go back to the word balance. People hate to hear that because it requires them to think. And the balance is, I've got to balance protein to carbohydrate. And here's how you do it. Here's the 3 things you need to control inflammation for a lifetime. You need 1 hand, 1 eye, and 1 watch. Let's go through a day. At every meal, divide your plate into 3 equal sections. That's why you need the eye. On 1/3 the plate, you put some low-fat protein. It could be chicken, fish, and for vegetarians or vegans, it could be, soybean imitation meat products or tofu. The other 2/3 of the plate, you fill it until it's overflowing with colorful carbohydrates. And finally, you add a dash of monounsaturated fat. It could be olive oil or guacamole. Now, why do you need the watch? If you balanced your plate correctly, for the next 5 hours you will have no hunger and you will have peak mental acuity. That's easy. The secret is trying to do it the best you can from meal to meal to meal, because all the hormonal benefits of a meal will only last 5 hours.
Now, you mentioned colorful, and when I think of greens, I know a lot of people think of iceberg lettuce. I doubt if that's real popular in the Mediterranean. So when you're thinking green, What vegetables are you referring to?
Well, I'll go back to my old standbys, the peppers, the onions, the broccoli, the green beans, all the things your grandmother spent hours and hours trying to cook to make them tasty.
Well, I'm assuming that if we eat beet greens and kale and collard greens and mustard greens, those are even greener than the ones you've already mentioned. Are they also richer in polyphenols?
No, they are actually not as rich as the ones I just discussed. But the problem with the leafy vegetables is you have to eat a massive amount to get enough carbohydrates. So when people have their kale shake in the morning, they and say, boy, I'm really healthy, saying, hey, good, now make another 3 gallons to get enough polyphenols to make it worth your while. So one of the problems with the romaine lettuce and the kale, you've got to eat massive amounts to get enough polyphenols.
Dr. Sears, I have to admit, I am skeptical of what you are telling us. I think it's not that hard to eat enough kale or spinach or beet greens to actually amount to something.
Oh, I agree. It can be done. It can be done. It's just, from the standpoint that the amount that most people are putting into, let's say, a blender or you putting on their plate is not generating enough of the total polyphenols you'll need on a daily basis.
Now, I know a lot of people think kale shake for breakfast is delicious, but I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around that. What is a Barry Sears breakfast?
Actually, here's one I've been doing for the last 20 years. I might have an 8 egg white omelet. You say, 8 egg whites? My God, that's only about 20, maybe 30 grams of protein, like maybe 4 ounces of chicken breast. And to the 8 egg white omelet, I'll put on some guacamole, and then I'll have a small bowl of slow-cooked oatmeal like your grandmother used to make. What you've done there is to balance the protein to the carbohydrate to get the right hormonal response so you're not hungry for the next 5 hours.
You're listening to Dr. Barry Sears, who has promoted the idea of the zone as the way to control insulin and lots of other hormones. He has written a lot of books, including The Zone, Mastering the Zone, The Omega RX Zone, Zone Meals in Minutes, The Anti-Inflammation Zone, and of course, his most recent book is The Mediterranean Zone. I still think I'd put spinach in that omelet.
I know you would, and I happen to like it myself. We need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll learn more about the role of the hand, the eye, and the watch for healthy eating.
What about breakfast? What's wrong with waffles?
We'll hear how carbs affect insulin and low blood sugar, and we'll learn about the symptoms of hypoglycemia.
Why is it so hard to change the way we eat?
Maybe what we need is a way to make junk foods healthy. Could we get the benefits of polyphenols in a pill?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening to this podcast of The People's Pharmacy. If you like it, why not rate or review it in the iTunes store? We'd appreciate it.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Squatty Potty Toilet Step Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
And by Redx Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 989. That number again, 800-732-2334, or you can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're discussing the principles of healthy eating with Dr. Barry Sears. He's responsible for the concept of the zone as an anti-inflammatory diet. His latest book is The Mediterranean Zone.
Dr. Sears, you have described what we need to eat following the Mediterranean zone pattern as a hand, an eye, and a watch. So we've got the hand because the protein, the lean protein that we're supposed to eat at every meal should be roughly the size of the palm of our hand. So if my hand is smaller, I don't need quite as much, right?
Exactly. My hand is bigger. I'm 6'5". I need more. It's not fair, but that's the way life is.
Right. Okay. So we've got the hand. We've got the eye because we can look at the plate and see that it's divided into 3 sections, and 2/3 of the sections are full of colorful vegetables, preferably as colorful as possible. I assume then that the watch is going to play some role. What role does it play?
The lack of hunger and the maintaining of peak mental acuity comes from basically you're looking at now how the diet is interacting with the hypothalamus. That's in the brain that tells you to eat or not eat. The peak mental acuity is the stabilization of blood sugar. Now, what happens when you eat a big bowl of pasta at 12 o'clock? By 2 o'clock, you can barely keep your eyes open and you're falling asleep. So it basically doesn't meet the 5-hour rule. So that watch will tell you very precisely how well you balance that last meal to be in concordance with your biochemistry. And what you're looking to do is to build up a recipe book of hormonal winning meals that you like to eat, that you can come back to over and over again like a drug to maintain that constant maintenance of the hormones generated by the food we eat within that zone.
So what you're suggesting, I guess, is that if I have waffles with a big slab of margarine and then maybe some syrup on top with a big glass of orange juice and a bagel.
Not a good breakfast?
Probably not going to get me to that 5-hour range.
If I was a betting man, I'd say no.
Well, that happens to be true for Joe and for me. I don't know if it's true for everyone, but it is true for Joe and me.
I think it's probably true for 99.999% of Americans.
And we wonder why our kids maybe not performing at peak capacity about 10:30 in the morning.
Exactly. You go to any school in America and you ask the teachers, what are the 2 worst times to try to teach children? It's usually at 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Why? Because now their blood sugar levels are so low, they might as well fall asleep. And because of what they ate at breakfast, if they ate breakfast at all in the morning, and what they ate for the school lunch program.
All right, Dr. Sears, walk us through this just a little bit more explicitly, if you would, please. If they're eating a lot of food that is going to generate blood sugar, like waffles and syrup, why is their blood sugar so low 2 hours later?
Because as those carbohydrates enter the bloodstream as glucose, it's toxic. And the body has a unique hormone called insulin that says, get this toxic stuff, I need some, but not too much, and store it someplace. And that's what insulin will do. It will store it, yes, in some of the livers and some of the muscles, but primarily it will store it in the fat. So again, the more excess carbohydrates you consume in any meal, you're basically calling upon 400 million years of evolution to say, bring out the hormone insulin and basically drive down blood sugar levels too rapidly. That's called hypoglycemia. And what happens when you get hypoglycemia? 1, you get hungry, and 2, you get very foggy in your thinking.
Having experienced this myself, sometimes you may even feel a little woozy or faint.
Woozy, faint, and basically you're not fun to be around.
Not to mention crabby, yes. I was about to throw that in.
I'm keeping my mouth shut here. I'm not saying a word.
But you haven't had to deal with that for a long time.
No, we've been very careful about what we eat. You know, Dr. Sears, when we talk to diabetologists and other people who are concerned about obesity, they frequently say, all this diet stuff, it's a big fad, this idea of a high glycemic index, don't worry about it. It's really all about calories. Just eat less and exercise more.
Right. Calories in, calories out. That's what counts, right?
Wrong. What is basically hormones generated and hormones lingering. Let's talk about the diabetologist. If we have one place that's considered the hallmark of knowledge of diabetes, it had to be the Joslin Diabetes Research Center at Harvard Medical School. And if so, what are the dietary guidelines of the Joslin Diabetes Research Center to treat obesity, metabolic syndrome, and diabetes? It turns out they're exactly the zone diet. Basically, if you can get these people and they've shown the studies, if you can get these people to follow that diet, their reliance upon medications drops dramatically within about 6 months' time. So again, for the diabetologist, says either the people at Joslin know nothing about diabetes, or maybe they know something and it's getting hard to translate that information to the physician and then translate it to the patient.
Now, you used the word if you can get people to change. Well, that's a big if. Why is it so difficult for so many people to make the kind of dietary changes that you're recommending?
Well, as humans, we're creatures of habit. And therefore, basically, if you can't bring Muhammad to the mountain, you bring the mountain to Muhammad. We talked about junk food 1.0. We've done a very good job. I look at the future maybe being perhaps junk food 2.0. Can we take basically the foods people like to eat, the 3 Ps in America, pizza, pasta, and pastries, and reconfigure them to give them a totally different hormonal response? So now, rather than having foods that make you fat and make you sick, they're foods that make you thin, and they make you well, and they're convenient, and they're the foods you already like to eat. That lies the challenge for the food industry for the 21st century.
Now, Dr. Sears, Americans love pills, and although you have said that food can be your best medicine, your best drug, there are an awful lot of us who say, come on, Dr. Sears, I am not going to eat 2 pounds of vegetables a day, however many servings that is, 5, 6, 7, 8 servings. Just forget about it. Why don't you just put all those polyphenols in a pill? I'll take a pill. I'll even take 5 pills if you can get all the good stuff from those dark green leafies and very colorful vegetables and, just make it easy for me.
Well, actually, we've done that. You can basically take the polyphenols, which are found in very low concentrations in fruits and vegetables, and through very, very complicated purification, make the purified polyphenols. So you could actually do that. And we've been working with several manufacturers to basically do exactly that, and we're doing our clinical testing. It's not my preferred format, but saying, if this is what it takes, then this is a way of getting those polyphenols. But though I've always loved the Jetsons and say, here's my little dinner at night, a couple of pills, but we want to get back to having adequate levels of protein, adequate levels of carbohydrates, adequate levels of polyphenols, and adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids. And we have to find new, unique ways of doing that. A concentration of polyphenols, it can be done. Who's one of the leaders in the area of this? It's called the Mars Candy Company. Mm-hmm. That they've done a very good job of making a cocoa polyphenol extract that's very rich in polyphenols.
Right. They have 375 milligrams of cocoa flavanols in one packet of their CocoVia product.
Exactly. And that's about 800 milligrams of total polyphenols. Say, I got it. One of their packets, I'm pretty close to the 1 gram per day. You got it.
Dr. Sears, fish oil, omega-3s have taken a bit of a hit in the last several years. Studies have come out suggesting that fish oil doesn't protect against the heart, doesn't protect against other chronic conditions, and that this was all a big fad, and we made a big mistake when we started encouraging people to consume extra fish oil. How do you respond?
Well, actually, it turns out that the mistake was that we did not encourage them to consume enough fish oil. And the problem is most fish oil that is available today is really the sewer of the sea. Things that we've thrown in the environment the last 2 generations, mercury from coal burning, PCBs, dioxanes, flame retardants. These are just thrown in the oceans, and they all end up being basically accumulated by the fish. So when you go to a health food store and buy a typical fish oil, it's basically just loaded with toxins. Now, in terms of the benefits, it's like a drug. if I don't give an adequate level of a drug, will it work? Of course not. And that's the thing about fish oils. You need to give an adequate level. And how do we know what an adequate level is? You measure the ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA. Now, when you do this, the levels you require to get down to the same levels of the Japanese are actually quite extraordinary, probably 5 to 8 grams a day of omega-3 fatty acids. 25 years ago, Harvard Medical School showed with agents that if you could basically give high levels, and this is about 5 grams of omega-3 fatty acids per day, that within 10 weeks you saw a dramatic reduction of the levels of a cytokine called tumor necrosis factor. This is the basis of how the 3 of the largest selling drugs in the 21st century work. These are drugs to treat rheumatoid arthritis, things like of Remicade or of Humira or Enbrel. These are all antibodies that bind tumor necrosis factor. And yet Harvard Medical School said 25 years ago, with no safety problems at all, that you could give people these levels of fatty acids and in the process reduce tumor necrosis factor to the same level these drugs can. So again, our problem with the lack of efficacy or the controversy is because either you have people not giving enough fish oil to see a therapeutic effect, or the experiments they are based upon are really poorly done because they were not controlled to reduce the levels of the ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA. When you do, you see extraordinary therapeutic results.
Dr. Sears, I'm hoping that you will tell us the story of using fish oil to treat the miner, Randall McCloy, who was rescued, the only one to survive, from I believe West Virginia mine disaster some years ago.
Well, this was an interesting story because this was the Sago mine disaster that occurred in January of 2006. And right at that mine disaster, I got a phone call that night from the chief neurosurgeon. And he said, I've read your book, this was the Omega RX Zone, and I think omega-3 fatty acids can help save this remaining miner. Randall was one of 13 miners who were trapped in a carbon monoxide atmosphere for 42 hours. And when they broke through and rescued the miners, 12 were dead, and Randall was basically dead on arrival. He had basically heart failure, kidney failure, liver failure, and brain failure. When they did an MRI of his brain, there was virtually no white matter there. It had been destroyed by inflammation. So his chances of likelihood of surviving were slim. If he did, he'd probably end up being a vegetable. So I told the neurosurgeon, this is Dr. Julian Bales, who's one of the top neurosurgeons in the country, I said, I think we can help. And I think he needs about 15 grams a day of omega-3 fatty acids. The line went silent, and then came back and said, but he'll bleed to death. I said, he won't bleed to death for 2 reasons. Why? We just finished the study with kids with ADHD, and they didn't bleed to death, and we have this new blood test that we can measure the ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA to make sure he doesn't take too much. He says, we have no option. So that night I airmailed out a number of bottles of our liquid fish oil, and he started basically giving him 15 grams a day through his feeding tube. 2 months after that, he came out of his coma. So we started giving the 15 grams a day through an old-fashioned way, a tablespoon. And 2 months later, after that, or 4 months after the disaster in total, he went home.
You know, you're talking about a kind of revolution in the way we feed our kids, in the way we eat ourselves. And the biggest challenge is going to be in our brain, making the choices that you're suggesting so that we feel better, we perform better, we're better in every way, and we have less inflammation. So the big question, how are we going to make those changes? What is the take-home message for the people who are listening to us today when it comes to the Mediterranean zone?
Well, I think the take-home message is if you want to take control of your future, you have the power. The drug companies are not the answer. The doctor's not the answer. You are the kitchen is where we start. But now we have to find tools, if that's too hard, to make it easier for you to comply. One way might be those concentrated polyphenol capsules. Another way is saying how to get adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids. No one's going to take cod liver oil. It's god-awful. But concentrated fats free of things like PCBs are a potential answer. So you have to make it easy. We've taken our technology and made processed foods 1.0, has basically left a devastating track record. The same technology can be applied to make processed foods 2.0 because we're running out of time. We have to have things which are convenient, yet they're hormonally correct. It's possible to do that. The question is, do we have the will as a country if we're not willing to spend a lot of time in the kitchen? It does take a lot of time to basically prepare foods. But if we know what the answer is, we need a balance of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. We need polyphenols. We need omega-3 fatty acids. Then we have ways of basically making that happen and basically getting all the health benefits with the least amount of stress of changing our habits.
Dr. Barry Sears, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
You've been listening to Dr. Barry Sears. He's a research scientist who's become an authority on dietary control of hormone response. He's president of the nonprofit Inflammation Research Foundation. His 13 books include The Zone, The Anti-Inflammation Zone, and his most recent, The Mediterranean Zone.
And you know, when it comes to vegetables, I still think that if you eat 6 to 8 servings a day, that's way better than taking a pill.
I absolutely agree. Plus, it's tastier.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for listening. Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineers the program. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number is 800-345-7339. The website, uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 989. That number again, 800-732-2334. On the web at peoplespharmacy.com.
And when you visit our site, you can check out prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Share your own experience and your thoughts on today's show, and don't miss our Listen and Read opportunity, where you can read Dr. Sears' book and listen to the CD.
You can also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You'll never miss another People's Pharmacy program again. You can also share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.